I'm going to start by talking about this ecosystem that we live in. And I'm doing it for several reasons. One is that you get a sense that this developed organically. There was no government that decreed biotechnology was going to start in Boston. It developed organically out of our universities. And that's important because many of you, I suspect, are from foreign countries, from different parts of the United States that want to develop biotechnology. And it's, I think, going to be helpful for you to understand how it started here and the importance of universities, particularly the importance of research universities. And I want to begin with a few basic principles of drug development and what academics labs do and what companies do. That is, academic research labs, biology, bioengineering at MIT, Children's Hospital, they research the basic cellular and molecular biology underlying a disease. And these are generally supported by not-for-profit entities. Government support, patient or disease-based organizations like Diabetes Society, the Cancer Society, and philanthropic support. And institutions like these do not actually develop drugs. What they do is develop candidates, proof of concepts. So you might have a molecule, be it a small chemical or a protein. It will work in a mouse. It'll work in cell cultures. Happens to be very easy to cure cancer in mice. Okay? It's not so easy to treat cancers in humans. Perhaps we'll talk about it. But you get an idea of what might be a therapeutic. And from then on, it's got to be commercial. You need venture capital, that is financing of what we're talking about. Often it's financed by large biotechs that will finance the small biotechs. But that's where you need to get the actual FDA-approved drug. And I didn't mention here clinical testing. That's almost always done commercially. Manufacturing. I mean, it's one thing to make a small amount of a recombinant protein and give it to a dozen mice. It's quite another thing to manufacture kilograms of these proteins in a pure form, reproducibly, that can be given to human patients. And that's really where these companies come in. And Andrew referred to the valley of death. And that is these very early stage companies. When you have this idea, you've cured a genetic disorder in mice, and can you really get it to work in humans? That requires a lot of funding up front with very little insurance that you're going to get a drug at the end. So that's the risky part, and that's where a lot of companies die. Okay? Fortunately, in Boston, we have an ecosystem that is aware of this and can take care of it. So I've started many companies, or helped start. This is my list of what's important. And in my view, which is widely shared, it starts with faculty, with entrepreneurial faculty. I'm not the only one to have started multiple companies. But have an environment where a faculty member, often with his or her students, can go off and put a company together. you need an advisory board. You need a board of directors who has considerable business experience. You also generally need a scientific advisory board of eminent scientists, leaders in their field, who can put the science together, and then the board of directors who combines the science and the business. You need an environment where you can actually have people who work at the company. This sounds strange, but in Boston, there are well over 100,000 people in the biotech industry. And if you need a chief scientific officer or a chief financial officer, you can find them. You can find postdoctoral fellows and graduate students who can start work in your company. Maybe they were trained in your own laboratory. You don't often find that in a lot of places. You obviously need intellectual property. You need a business plan. Perhaps obvious to you who are in Sloan, it's certainly not obvious to many of my colleagues in the scientific field. You know, what is a business plan? As I often say, you start these companies to make money. That's not a trivial statement. If you can't show how you're going to make money and make something that somebody's going to buy and pay for, you're not going to get the financial backing that you need. Government, and this is going to be controversial to many of you, government plays a minor role. Governments, as I love to say, are good at infrastructure, building buildings, building bridges and roads, schools and hospitals. Governments do not understand innovation. In fact, it's sort of contrary to what a government does, a city or a state. And we have at MIT policies in place that a few other research universities have that encourage faculty to become entrepreneurs. We're given literally 1 day a week outside consulting privileges, which we can use either at for-profits or non-for-profits. And we have to account for our time, 52 working days a year, but that said, we can do pretty much what we want as long as we understand conflicts of interest. So this is a good part of the ecosystem. And MIT particularly encourages faculty to start companies. There have been reports that, I forget you may remember the State Street one that's been updated. If all the companies started by MIT faculty and alumni were lumped together, it would be, what, the 10th largest economy in the world, something like that. Okay, so this is serious. There are courses, and I put in this course that you're in right now, which is part of it that's to encourage entrepreneurship and to encourage many of you on the course to starting your own companies. Just a comment on geography. I find myself talking to real estate development groups about this, and they get it. That is, people tend to be lazy and they don't want to walk very far. And in particular, the investors, the venture people, they like to be able to walk to the companies that they're starting. I was just in Singapore talking about this, and I mentioned Singapore has one terrible disadvantage. It's very hot there, and people don't want to go outside. This is non-trivial. And what you see is an aerial view of the area called Kendall Square. The Whitehead Institute, where my lab is, you can see the arrow, is right in the middle of Kendall Square, which is surrounded by several hundred biotech and pharmaceutical companies. In fact, we have labs or offices of 15 or so of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies within this area. And that's what it is today. That's the same area 40 years ago. It was an industrial wasteland. Okay? Are you surprised? Kendall Square didn't always exist. It grew up organically through this process of recombinant DNA coupled with faculty entrepreneurs. We constructed the Whitehead Institute in the early 80s. I mean, this is Kendall Square. It's this little corner right there where my finger is. That's Kendall Square. Okay? Here's the Whitehead Institute. The Whitehead Institute, the members of the Whitehead are faculty at MIT. And roughly half of the faculty, my faculty colleagues, like me, have started publicly traded companies. Okay? And, well, we'll talk about some of them later on. The Human Genome Project, it was done at the Whitehead Institute at MIT. Eric Lander, interestingly trained as a mathematician, a Rhodes Scholar with a PhD in applied mathematics, was the leader of the Human Genome Project. As far as we know, he's never taken a biology course. Okay? So there's hope for the rest of you. Okay, but he led the Human Genome Project. That led, in turn, to several $100 million of investment by Eli Broad in the Broad Institute, which is now the world's epicenter of gene and genome and genetics analysis, and has in turn spawned many companies. You see where I'm going, or have gone. And this is another way of looking at it. I mentioned Rubius. Later on, we'll talk about the specifics. A company that came directly out of research in my lab and the lab of a colleague, Hidde Ploch. And we started it at the Whitehead Institute. The group that financed it, Flagship Ventures, literally a 5-minute walk down Main Street. It has since moved its office, but it'd literally be around the corner from where we are right now. I'll show you in a moment Lab Central, which is a state-supported incubator where we started the company. That's a 5-minute walk in the other direction. After 2 years of incubation, the company got a Series A investment of $25 million or so and moved to a rented lab facility where I've indicated. Binney Street isn't named, but somewhere around where you see the word Biogen is Binney Street, which used to be low brick buildings, is now cheek to jowl with 6-story glass-fronted labs. And we're about to move in there. So you get a sense of what's involved in this ecosystem. And I mentioned this government as providing infrastructure. And I'll just mention briefly incubators. Here's Lab Central. It's a completely supported lab. That is, it has all the machines that you would need to do modern molecular and cell biology research. It was started by, it's an old building that was renovated for $10 million by the state. For $5,000 a month, you rent a lab bench. You can put 2 people at that lab bench. That's your company. Okay? Tivard, which is my latest company, has 2 people at a lab bench. Rubius started with 4 people at 2 lab benches. It's an open lab. It's co-working space. but you can start the company on Friday and start research on Monday morning, literally. And if you can only stay at Lab Central 2 years. Either you die or you leave. Okay? That's tough, but it works. And you can stay at this lab bench for a while, but if you get a little bigger, you can move into a private lab that would have 10 people. You can close the door, and you can grow a little bit. And now there are incubators, some private, some not-for-profit, where you can move your company in with 20 or 30 or 40 people. So what we have here is an infrastructure in place that makes it relatively easy to start a biotech company. Any questions you have about what it might be like to start something like this?
Do you think this is reproducible?
Yes. Is it reproducible? This is a key question. The answer is yes, but you must have a great research university. On the other hand, having a great research university does not guarantee success. I mean, for instance, I've been to Stockholm several times. They have several great universities. They don't have the culture. You know, there are a number of places that have very good universities that don't have the culture. Beijing, for instance, you don't have that culture. Singapore, you get the culture, but not enough. Where else was I recently? Santiago, Chile. A couple of quite good universities there, but they don't have the culture. So it is reproducible, but it takes effort, and it's particularly important that you have a top university. And it also helps if you can focus on some broader area where there's a synergy. Yes?
Can you speak a little bit about the role of non-dilutive funding grants in starting a company?
Okay, I'll do my best. I'm not sure what I'm not sure I know exactly what non-dilutive funding is. It's basically funding where you get a certain number of shares of the company. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm talking more about the use of grant funds.
Ah, grant funds, yes. Grant funds in companies, I know it happens. I'm not very enthusiastic. I mean, there's the SBIR, the Small Business Program, where companies can get this kind of grant funds. And my experience, although I don't have numbers to back it up, is that not a lot of these companies make it. In other words, it really is the marketplace. That's my sense. I think grant funds are very important at the earlier stage in universities and hospitals where they can support the basic underlying innovative science. I think once you get to a company, as I said, you start the company to make money. The exception would be venture philanthropy in rare diseases. And I'll come to those, but diseases where there might not be a marketplace, that someone often with family related to the disease can support it. That would be an exception, but it could be a common exception. Great questions. Please.
Okay. You mentioned that MIT encouraged the faculty to start companies. This is very different from a lot of other universities in the world.
I know that.
So can you talk a little bit about what led to that decision and what's the rationale behind that? How do you develop that kind of culture to... Yeah.
Well, how to explain it? First of all, in most countries, universities are run totally by the government. And governments, as I said, don't like innovation. They don't know how to support it. And in many countries, if you're working at a university, you're a civil servant. And God forbid you should do anything other than work for the university. So it's a cultural difference. MIT like Stanford, like others, sees itself more as an engineering institution. But increasingly, other universities in other countries are going to this model because it works. And I'm glad you asked the question. Wherever you come from, make the change. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I talk to government ministers reasonably frequently, and that's part of the message. And you see, I put it in a slightly different way. That is, if you're at a university and you've conducted research in a certain field and you've made a discovery that you think can lead to a drug or a pharmaceutical or a device or whatnot, I've come to the realization that we have an obligation to society to take that into the marketplace. You see, I sort of turn everything on its head. It's not that you start a company to make money, although you do, but you start a company because you have a unique idea, a unique product, potential product, and I think we have obligations to take it out and do something with it. So I think that can be an argument that is used. But I agree with you. Most countries, most universities don't have that. One more question, if there's one. Okay. Yes, lady, yes.
You spoke to the fact that you thought Boston has a unique culture, or you said that it was reproducible, this model, but that many places have good universities but not the culture for it. Can you speak to what are the core elements of the culture you think exists here?
Well, it's a culture of entrepreneurship that is passed on from generation to generation. I mean, and I'll give you two personal examples, okay? And this influenced my own decision. When I was an undergraduate at Kenyon, I spent a summer in an organic chemistry lab at Stanford. Pure organic chemistry. The head of the lab, some of you may know his name, Carl Gerasi. He was an organic chemist who realized that some of the steroid chemistry he was doing could be used to synthesize the molecules that became the oral contraceptive. And he set up Syntex back in the 50s. He became a billionaire, but, I think everyone understands what a huge impact birth control pills had on society. Second example is my brother Leonard, who followed me to Kenyon and then did a PhD here in this building, or the predecessor of this building, the Sloan School, with John Little. And we're talking 1967. He started a company called Management Decision Systems. So this has been going on for a long time, and it's relatively recently that biologists have gotten into the game. But the econ folks, the chemists, they've been doing this for a long time. This is not new. One more.
Thank you. I just want to know, what are the hot areas in biotech where the money is chasing the company, and what do you think is the future in that space?
Well, the money is chasing good ideas. Not every idea is a good one. And I think we'll come to that as we go through the course. Okay?